Josiah Faylauer bringing you a research bite. If you want to see this video in American Sign Language, see the video notes below, and there's a link there to a video with the same content but in American Sign Language. Click on that link and you can find it there. Also, if you like these research bites, don't forget, subscribe to the channel. For those that study expert performance, there is some tension and debate between innate ability and practice, and how people become expert, top-level, amazing performers in whatever field they are, whatever they do. Researchers have been publishing more and more studies recently studying this very thing, and today's article is, to be honest, at the outfront, somewhat weak. It doesn't provide a ton of new data. It does have a pretty strong literature review section in their publication, but we'll get to it now. Today's article we're looking at is titled Mediating Processes of Expert Interpreting, a Deliberate Practice Approach. You'll find that deliberate practice has become somewhat of a buzzword these days. A lot of people talk about deliberate practice, and again, more and more people are studying deliberate practice. The authors of today's study are Behzad Ghonsooly and Majid Alahi Shirvan. This article was published in Novitas Royale in 2011. This was volume 5, issue 2. In this study, they looked at one participant. They had only one participant. He was male, 35 years old. His native language, his L1 language is Farsi, and his L2 language is English. This participant works in a translation interpreting department at the University of Reza, and he is known as a proficient interpreter. The authors did not define how he was known as a proficient interpreter. They also did not define any qualifications or certifications of this interpreter, but that he is known as being proficient. The authors had a pre-experimental phase, experimental phase, and post-experimental phase. In this article, they really only describe the experimental phase in much detail. The pre-experimental phase that they described was very brief. Consisted of a sit-down with this one participant. He was given some sentences to translate from English to Farsi and back, and that was the pre-experimental phase. So with this participant, all of the information after that pre-experimental phase was all self-reported. It was reported in a journal, and he was asked to report on his engagement in practice of language acquisition or language reception or practice. Again, the authors didn't exactly define what the parameters of this participant's practice would entail, but they do describe some of the types of practice that this participant engaged in, which I'll describe here in a minute. He kept a journal of his activities, and he either listened to source material in English or he read written English. These are two of the types of practices that he engaged in. This data collection was not quantitative, so the participant self-reported his activities, and some of his activities he self-reported were very general. They didn't include any timestamps or any specific numbers of hours. The authors were trying to detail this type of practice as intense practice or certain types of activities as intense practice, but again, these weren't really defined in the study, or at least they weren't reported as being defined very well. One example of a journal entry from this participant said, "In the afternoon, I read a book on politics while the radio was playing in the background." So, there were a couple other descriptions that were equally vague. Again, they didn't describe a start or end time or the type of engagement with the source material, if there was anything done beyond just a passive listening or reading. The authors describe intense practice after the participant says he listened to the same English radio program 8 times, and so this was their definition of intense practice. It seems as if the overall goal of these researchers is to get some type of recording of somebody engaging in deliberate practice, as they're defining it, or intense practice, and wondering how somebody who would be gauged as proficient, again very loosely defined by the authors, would be engaging in practice in their typical week or month. Here's what you need to know about this article. Basically, these authors agree with other authors that they reference that deliberate practice, generally speaking, somebody who's going to be an expert level performer, that can be acquired through intense or deliberate practice. So expert level performance and competence can be acquired through deliberate practice. These authors claim that the findings and the reports from this participant and his journal entry supports this claim. These authors do reference a study by Erickson and Lehman, which was published in 1996, and that article found three things to be true, or claimed three things to be true. One, that measures of general basic capacities, so someone's general capabilities that one might define as being innate or inborn, that those do not predict success in a specific domain. The second thing that these authors found, Erickson and Lehman in 1996, is that superior performance of experts, it's often very domain specific and does not transfer to other domains. So if somebody is good in one thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be amazing at something else. You might be a really great violin player, it doesn't mean that you're going to be a great factory worker, or vice versa. And number three, differences between experts and those that are less proficient or less expert. They always tend to reflect some attributes that are acquired during very lengthy times of practice. That those differences are almost always defined by or a result of very long periods of very intense and focused practice. Again, those were points that were pulled from Erickson and Lehman 1996 that these authors cite in their literature review. Again, referencing another study and another researcher. Again, this is Anders Ericsson, and this time they report about Ericsson that Ericsson says that the organization of knowledge, that the mental representation in experts is advanced, that they actually encode knowledge in a way that allow for very rapid and easy retrieval of that information. And that this representation of knowledge, it allows experts the ability to self-monitor and to evaluate their own performance, which again will lead to better performance as somebody can monitor their own errors, accuracies, make corrections, and make changes as necessary. So, what does this study add to the broader pool of studies on expert performance? Not much, but just a drop. Again, it does offer a pretty good literature review. There is a growing body of research all about practice versus innate ability, expert performance. Erickson is one who kind of leads the charge in these studies. There are a couple others that are of note as well. But for years, there are several researchers that have been looking at this specifically. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, there is that tension between innate ability and practice and how expert performance is really attained. One of those articles by Angela Duckworth being Deliberate Practice Spells Success, Why Grittier Competitors Triumph at the National Spelling Bee. This is a very interesting study that looked at spelling bee participants and the types of practice they engage in. Another study that's really great that's out there, summing up hours of any type of practice versus identifying optimal practice of activities, commentary on McNamara, Moreau, and Hambrick. This published in 2016 by Anders Ericsson, one of those prominent researchers in the area of expert performance and practice. And third, another really great article that's been published is titled The Role of Deliberate Practice in the Acquisition of Expert Performance. This published in 1993, so a bit of an older study. This published by Erickson, Crampy, and Romer. Again, stay tuned for research bites on those research articles. A link to this article is in the video notes below. I encourage you to read it in full. So much information can be found there, especially again in the literature review section. And if you like these research bites, subscribe to the channel so that you can get more research bites in the future. Remember, stay curious, pursue knowledge, and learn something new every day. This has been Josiah Failauer with a Research Bite. Thanks for watching.